The order reached us just after noon, when the heat inside the steel hull felt like we were sitting inside a furnace. Our tank crew had barely finished a quick meal of dry rice and canned fish before the company commander climbed onto the turret and gave us the mission. A mechanized infantry unit moving toward Hill 62 needed armored support immediately. Intelligence reported scattered Pon Pot fighters in the area, but nobody could tell us exactly how many or where they were hiding. Our job was simple on paper: move with the infantry, clear the route, and be ready to provide fire support if the column ran into trouble. Nothing about the Cambodian jungle was ever simple. I was the tank commander, responsible for every decision inside our cramped steel home. Beside me was Wa, our driver. He came from Nam Dinh province, spoke only when necessary, and could maneuver a tank through terrain that most people wouldn't even attempt on foot. Before the war, his father had built wooden fishing boats. Wa often told me that when everything was over, he wanted to go home and learn the trade. Our gunner, Tan, couldn't have been more different. He was from Quang Nam and always found a reason to smile. Even after weeks without decent sleep, he carried an old dented canteen everywhere. The thing looked like it had been crushed by another tank, but he refused to replace it. He claimed the canteen had survived more battles than any of us. Inside the tank, every inch of space was occupied. Ammunition racks lined the walls. Spare tools were tied down wherever there was room. Bags of dry rice were wedged between equipment boxes. The smell of diesel fuel, gun oil, grease, and sweat had soaked into our uniforms so deeply that none of us noticed it anymore. When the engine roared to life, the entire vehicle shook beneath us. The familiar vibration traveled through the steel floor into my boots. Outside, the infantry formed their columns while our tracks slowly began chewing into the reddish dirt road. The rainy season had already turned the jungle trails into a nightmare. Thick mud clung to the tracks with every rotation. Fallen trees blocked parts of the route, forcing engineers to clear a path while we waited with engines idling. Every unnecessary stop burned fuel, and fuel was something nobody wanted to waste this deep inside Cambodia. The radio crackled constantly. Lead vehicle, report your position. Proceed with caution. Possible mines ahead. Sometimes the signal came through clearly. Other times it dissolved into static before disappearing completely. Losing communications in the jungle wasn't unusual, but it never stopped making my stomach tighten. Several of the younger infantrymen looked exhausted. Malaria had spread through the battalion during the previous month, and many were still recovering. Even our own crew wasn't untouched. I could still feel the weakness lingering in my legs from a fever only 2 weeks earlier. But nobody complained. Everyone understood that the mission came first. As afternoon faded, the dense jungle swallowed what little sunlight remained. Shadows stretched across the narrow trail, making every bend feel uncertain. The sound of our tracks grinding over wet red earth echoed between the trees while insects screamed from every direction. Then the radio suddenly came alive. Hill 62 reports sporadic gunfire. Unknown enemy movement. All units increase speed. No one inside the tank said a word. Wa quietly pushed the throttle forward. The engine growled louder. Our tank surged ahead toward Hill 62, unaware that before the next sunrise, nearly 50 of our comrades would never leave that jungle alive. The trouble started less than 2 miles from Hill 62. By then the trail had narrowed into a muddy cut through the jungle. Barely wide enough for one tank. The trees leaned in from both sides, their branches scraping against the turret like fingernails on steel. Every few minutes, Wa had to slow down so the infantry walking beside us could check the ground ahead. Nobody trusted the road. In that part of Cambodia, a smooth patch of dirt could hide a mine, and a broken branch could mean someone had passed through only minutes earlier. The lead tank was about 30 yards ahead of us when it suddenly dipped forward and stopped. At first, I thought the driver had braked on purpose. Then I saw the rear of the vehicle rise slightly and sink back down. Mud splashed around the tracks. The engine roared, but the tank didn't move. Its left track had slid into a deep water-filled hole hidden under a layer of red clay. "Stuck," Tan muttered from behind the gun sight. Wah didn't say anything. He just eased our tank to a stop and kept enough distance so we wouldn't end up in the same trap. I climbed halfway out of the hatch. The jungle air hit my face. Wet and heavy. The infantry had already dropped low along both sides of the road. Rifles pointed toward the trees. A young engineer crawled forward with a mine probe while two others dragged a tow cable from the lead tank. The company commander waved me over. "We pull it out," he said. "Fast." Fast. That word was easy to say and hard to live by. Every minute we stayed there. Darkness moved closer. Every minute the engines idled. The sound carried deeper into the jungle. If Pon Pot scouts were watching us, they didn't need binoculars. The noise alone told them exactly where we were. I went back to the tank and told Wah to get ready. He nodded once. That was his way of saying he understood everything: the mud, the danger, the pressure, and the fact that one mistake could break the cable or expose the whole column. We backed up slowly, linked the cable, then pulled. The first attempt failed. The cable snapped tight. The lead tank groaned, but the mud held it like a hand around the tracks. Men cursed under their breath. Someone shouted for more logs. The engineers shoved cut branches under the sunken track while mosquitoes swarmed their faces. Tan stayed inside the turret, scanning the tree line. I could hear him breathing through the headset. "Left side feels wrong," he said quietly. I looked toward the trees. Nothing moved, but after enough time in the jungle, you learned that silence could be worse than gunfire. We tried again. This time Wah handled the throttle like a surgeon. Too much power and we would rip something loose. Too little and the lead tank would stay buried. The engine growled low, then harder. Our tracks bit into the red earth. The cable tightened until I thought it might snap. Then, inch by inch, the lead tank rose out of the hole. No one cheered. Men simply moved faster. The engineers unhooked the cable, checked the track, and waved the column forward. But we had lost almost 40 minutes. The sky above the trees had turned gray. The radio signal faded in and out, broken by static. Orders came through in pieces. Something about movement near the western slope. Something about Hill 62 needing support before nightfall. Then the commander made the decision none of us wanted to hear. The column would split. The lead tanks and most of the infantry would continue on the main trail. My tank would take a smaller bypass along the southern shoulder of Hill 62 with one platoon of infantry, hoping to reach the high ground from the flank. I looked at the narrow trail ahead, half hidden by brush and shadow. Wah wiped mud from his hands and climbed back into the driver's seat. Tan tapped his dented canteen against the turret wall and forced a weak grin. "Looks like we're taking the scenic route," he said. Nobody laughed. As our tank turned off the main trail, the jungle closed behind us like a door. We reached the southern shoulder of Hill 62 just as the last daylight disappeared behind the jungle canopy. It wasn't much of a hill by any mapmaker's standard, but in that part of Cambodia, any piece of high ground mattered. From there, a man could watch the trail below, control a narrow approach, and decide who moved and who didn't. That was why both sides wanted it. That was also why none of us felt safe once we got there. Wah eased the tank under a thick stand of trees. The branches hung low, and leaves brushed across the turret as if the jungle itself was trying to hide us. I ordered the engine shut down for a few minutes. The sudden silence felt strange after hours of vibration. My ears kept ringing, and my body still felt the engine even after it stopped. Inside the tank, the heat stayed trapped. The steel walls sweated moisture. The smell of diesel, grease, gun oil, and unwashed uniforms filled the cramped space. Tan opened his dented canteen, took one small sip, then passed it to me. Save it, I told him. He shrugged. A man can't shoot straight with a dry throat. That was Tan. Even tired, even scared, he still tried to make things sound lighter than they were. Outside, the infantry began digging in around us. They worked quietly, using entrenching tools and bayonets, scraping shallow fighting holes into the red dirt. No one smoked, no one talked above a whisper. The jungle had gone too quiet, and every soldier there understood what that meant. A platoon leader came over and crouched beside the hole. His name was Bay, though everyone called him Brother Bay. He was older than most of us, maybe 30, with a narrow face and calm eyes. He had already seen enough fighting to know when not to waste words. "You'll stay here," he said. "If they hit us from the tree line, give us fire over the left slope." I nodded. "Can your men mark their position?" "2 short bursts," he said. "Then we drop low." Simple plans were the only kind that worked in the jungle. With Bay was a young soldier named Kwong. He couldn't have been more than 19. His helmet looked too big for his head, and his rifle was an AK that he held like he was still getting used to its weight. Later, I learned he had been a farmer's son from the Mekong Delta. He had written his mother that he would come home, build a brick house, and plant mango trees behind it. That night, he helped us cover the tank with branches. His hands shook a little, but he kept working. I pretended not to notice. Every man deserved room to be afraid without being ashamed of it. After midnight, a light rain began to fall. Wah and I climbed down to check the track tension with a flashlight wrapped in cloth. The beam was weak and yellow, barely enough to see by, but bright light could get a man killed. Mud had packed itself between the road wheels. A small branch had jammed near the left track, and Wah worked it loose with a pry bar while I held the light. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "When I get home, I'm never sleeping inside anything made of metal again." I almost laughed, but the sound never came out. War made men dream about ordinary things: a dry bed, a bowl of hot rice, a morning without orders. Those dreams were small, but they were what kept us alive. Near 2 in the morning, a scout crawled back from the forward slope. His face was wet with rain and sweat. "Fresh tracks," he whispered, "many of them, coming close." I looked toward the black wall of trees. Inside the tank, Tan was already turning the gun. The new order came a little before dawn, when the rain had faded into a thin mist and every man on Hill 62 looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. Our radio had been weak all night, but just before first light, the signal cleared long enough for us to catch the message. The infantry company holding the forward side of the hill was no longer staying in place. They had been ordered to pull back and regroup on the lower trail before daylight exposed the whole position. That changed everything. A tank sitting under trees as a firing point was one thing. A tank trying to cover a withdrawal through a narrow jungle path was something else entirely. In open country, armor could move, turn, and bring its gun to bear. In that jungle, we were a steel animal trapped in a hallway made of trees. Brother Bay came to the side of our hole with mud up to his knees. Kwong was behind him, carrying extra ammunition across his chest. The young man's eyes were red from no sleep, but he still nodded to me like he was trying to prove he was ready. "We move in 20 minutes, Bay said. "Your tank goes last." I understood why before he explained it. The infantry would pull back in small groups. Our tank would stay behind them, blocking the trail and giving them something solid to fall back behind if Pon Pot fighters pushed close. Tan heard it over the headset and let out a slow breath. "Last vehicle," he said. "That means everybody shoots at us first." "Not if you shoot straighter," Wah answered from the driver's seat. It was the kind of dry joke men make when fear is sitting right beside them. We spent the next few minutes preparing the tank. Tan checked the main gun and coaxial machine gun. Wah listened to the engine like a doctor listening to a patient's chest. I climbed out with a flashlight wrapped in cloth and walked around the vehicle, touching the track links, checking for branches, mud, or anything that might jam us once we started moving. The red clay sucked at my boots. My shirt clung to my back. The smell of wet leaves mixed with diesel smoke from the idling engine. Somewhere down the slope, men were quietly filling their packs, shaking mud off ponchos, tightening straps, checking their AK rifles by feel because no one wanted to show light. I looked at them and thought how young most of them were. Boys with thin wrists, boys who still kept letters from home wrapped in plastic, boys who joked about food, mothers, girlfriends, and the kind of houses they would build when the war ended. War never looked big when you saw it up close. It looked like a wet boot, a shaking hand, a dented canteen, a man trying to fold a letter before moving out. The withdrawal began slowly. The first squad moved past our tank, bent low, disappearing down the trail, then another squad, then stretcher bearers with 2 sick men wrapped in ponchos, both shaking from fever. Kwong stopped beside the hole for a second and handed me a small packet of dry rice. "For the crew," he whispered. I tried to give it back, but he shook his head. "You have the tank," he said. "We need you strong." I put the packet inside my jacket. I still remember the weight of it, though it could not have been more than a few ounces. Then the first shots cracked from the tree line. Not many, just 3 or 4, sharp, controlled, close enough to make every man freeze. Bay dropped to one knee and raised his hand. Nobody fired back yet. In the jungle, firing too early could reveal more than it solved. I climbed back into the turret and pulled the hatch halfway down. "Contact left slope," I said into the headset. "10, be ready." The radio suddenly filled with static again. A voice tried to break through, but the words came in pieces. "Forward group. Movement, western side, hold." Then nothing. The line of infantry was still stretched along the trail. Half had moved out, half were still above us. If we moved too soon, we would leave men uncovered. If we stayed too long, we might all be trapped. Hoa's hands rested on the controls. Tan's gun barrel shifted slowly toward the dark trees. Outside, Brother Bay shouted for his men to keep moving. Then the jungle opened with gunfire. We had barely moved 50 yards when the tank lurched hard to the left. Inside the turret, everything slammed at once: metal tools, empty shell casings, a bag of dry rice, Tan's shoulder against the gun mount. My helmet hit the edge of the hatch ring, and for a second all I heard was the ringing in my skull. Wah killed the throttle. "What happened?" I shouted into the headset. "Left track," he said. "Something's wrong." Those were the words every tank crew feared most in the jungle. A tank without its track was not armor anymore. It was a steel box waiting to be surrounded. Outside, gunfire cracked from the slope behind us. The infantry was still moving down the trail in broken groups, some crouching, some dragging the sick, some stopping to fire short bursts into the dark trees. The first light of morning had not arrived yet, but the sky had turned pale enough for shapes to appear. I pushed the hatch open and looked down. The left track had jumped halfway off the road wheels after climbing over a buried stump hidden under the mud. One section had twisted outward, packed with red clay and splintered wood. We were blocking the only path wide enough for the men behind us. Brother Bay ran up, bent low, breathing hard. "Can you move?" "Not like this," I said. "How long?" I looked at the track. In a repair yard, with tools and daylight, it might have taken 20 minutes. On a jungle trail, under fire, with mud to our ankles, it could take forever. "Give me 10, I said. I don't know why I said 10. Maybe because men needed a number to believe in. Wah was already climbing out with the pry bar. I grabbed the track tool and a small flashlight wrapped in cloth. Tan stayed inside, one hand on the gun controls, scanning the tree line. If anything moves close, I'll wake the whole hill, he said. Wah and I dropped into the mud beside the tank. The ground sucked at our boots. Bullets snapped somewhere overhead, cutting leaves loose from the branches. Dirt kicked up near the rear hull, but neither of us looked back. There are moments in war when fear has no room to stand. Your hands simply do the work they have done 100 times before. Pull, pry, clear the mud, check the guide horn, watch your fingers, don't rush so badly that you make it worse. Wah worked without a word. His face was streaked with grease and rainwater. Every few seconds, the tank rocked as Tan fired short bursts from the machine gun. The sound inside the trees was deafening, but comforting too. It meant our gunner was still alive. It meant we were not alone. Kwong appeared suddenly with 2 other infantrymen. "Tell your men to keep moving," I shouted. He ignored that and grabbed a log, shoving it under the track where Wah pointed. His hands were shaking again, but this time from effort, not fear. "You don't belong here," I told him. He looked at me, almost angry. "Neither do you." I had no answer for that. Together we forced the track back toward the road wheels. Inch by inch, mud filled my sleeves. My arms burned. The flashlight slipped twice, and each time the world vanished into darkness before I found the weak yellow beam again. Then a mortar round landed somewhere upslope. The blast rolled through the jungle like a door slamming shut. Men shouted. Leaves and dirt rained down on us. For one terrible second, I thought the infantry line had broken. Brother Bay's voice cut through the noise. "Keep moving. Down the trail. Don't stop." Wah shoved the pry bar one last time. "Try it," he yelled. I climbed halfway up the hull and signaled him through the open hatch. He dropped into the driver's seat and eased the tank forward. The track caught. It slipped once, grinding hard against the mud, then settled back onto the wheels with a heavy clanking sound that I still hear in my sleep. The tank moved. Not fast, not clean, but enough. I pulled myself back into the turret. Wah was breathing like he had run a mile. Tan's canteen rolled against my boot, dented side flashing in the dim light. The radio cracked once, then died completely. Ahead, the trail bent into thicker jungle. Behind us, the mortars started falling closer. Once the track caught again, we became the rear wall of the withdrawal. Wah kept the tank crawling backward down the trail, slow enough for the infantry to pass, fast enough to keep us from becoming a dead target. I stood half out of the turret with my headset pressed tight against one ear, trying to hear anything through the static, engine noise, and gunfire. The jungle around Hill 62 had turned from a dark shape into a living thing that spat bullets from every side. "Left slope," Brother Bay shouted from somewhere behind a fallen tree. 2 short bursts cracked from his men. That was the signal. "Tan, left side, tree line, low," I yelled. Tan answered with the main gun. The blast punched through the morning mist and shook leaves loose from the canopy. For a second the whole tank filled with smoke, burnt powder, and hot metal. Then he shifted to the machine gun, cutting a line across the slope where Bay's men had marked the movement. We were not trying to win a great battle. We were trying to buy minutes. That is what people who never fought often fail to understand. Sometimes a tank is not there to break through enemy lines or charge across open ground. Sometimes it is there to give tired men enough time to drag a wounded friend 5 more yards. Sometimes its armor means a young soldier can stand up, run, and live. The infantry came past us in pieces. One man carried 2 rifles. Another had blood on his sleeve but kept saying he was fine. 2 soldiers helped a feverish comrade who could barely walk. Kwong appeared again, face streaked with mud. Still carrying his AK, he slapped the side of our hull as he passed. "More men behind us," he shouted. "How many?" He shook his head. "I don't know. A lot." That was the worst answer in war. Not knowing. The radio went dead completely after that. No command post, no forward company, no clear order, just our own voices inside the headset and the shouting outside. I tried 3 times to reach the main column, but all I got was static, long and empty, like rain on a tin roof. Wah spoke from the driver's seat. Trail bends hard ahead. If we go past it, I can't see the slope anymore. I understood what he meant. If we pulled back too far, the men still on the upper side of Hill 62 would lose our cover. If we stayed where we were, the Pon Pot fighters could close in from the trees and hit us with grenades or satchel charges. Tan said, "Give me 1 more minute here." 1 more minute. In combat, men ask for impossible things in small numbers. 1 more minute, 1 more magazine, 1 more stretcher, 1 more chance to reach a friend. I looked back through the smoke and mist. Shadows moved between the trees. Some were our men, some were not. The slope blurred together in the half-light, and every second of hesitation could kill someone. "Hold," I told Wah. He didn't argue. Tan fired again, shorter this time, careful not to hit our own men. Base platoon answered from the ground, falling back by 2s. One fired while the other moved. Then they switched. It was disciplined, but I could hear the strain in their voices. Mortar rounds began landing farther down the trail, trying to cut off the withdrawal. The first explosion threw red dirt across the front armor. The second hit close enough to lift the tank on its suspension. My teeth snapped together so hard I tasted blood. Inside the turret, Tan's dented canteen rolled under the ammunition rack. No one reached for it. Then a runner came out of the mist, stumbling, waving both arms. "The forward company is cut off," he shouted. We lost contact with them near the saddle. For a moment, every sound seemed to fall away. The forward company was the unit that had moved ahead of us before dawn. Nearly 50 men, maybe more, men who had eaten beside us, joked beside us, shared dry rice and water from crushed canteens. Brother Bay looked up at me from the side of the trail. His face said what no radio could. Some of our people were still up there, and the road behind us was closing fast. The runner's words stayed in the air longer than the smoke. The forward company was cut off near the saddle. Nearly 50 men were somewhere above us, trapped between the trees and the enemy fire. We could hear shooting from that direction now, scattered and uneven, the kind of sound that told you men were no longer fighting from fixed positions. They were trying to survive wherever the jungle let them drop. Brother Bay looked up at me and shouted, "Can your tank push back up?" I looked down at Wah through the open hatch. His face was gray under the grease. The left track had just been repaired in the mud, and I knew it might not hold if we forced the tank up the slope again. The trail behind us was packed with wounded, fever cases, and infantry still trying to get out. If we moved forward and got stuck, we would block everyone. If we stayed, those men near the saddle might be swallowed before daylight fully came. There are decisions in war that do not give you a clean side to stand on. Tan turned from the sight and looked at me. "We can go," he said. Wah didn't answer right away. He listened to the engine, one hand resting on the control levers like he was feeling the tank's pulse. "She'll move," he said finally, "but I don't know for how long." That was as honest as any prayer. I pulled the map from under my jacket, though the rain had made it soft at the folds. The saddle was not far in distance, maybe a few hundred yards. But in that jungle a few hundred yards could be another world. The trail narrowed before it climbed. There was no room to turn around. If Pon Pot fighters had already reached both sides, we would be driving straight into a pocket. Then Kwong appeared again, breathless, mud on his chin, eyes wide. "Brother Bay," he said, "some of 2nd Platoon is still up there. I heard them calling." Bay cursed under his breath. Not loud, just enough for me to hear the pain in it. I wanted someone else to decide. I wanted the radio to come alive with a clear order. I wanted a senior officer to say, "Go," or "Stay." so that whatever happened afterward would not belong to me alone. But the radio was dead. The men were looking at our tank. That is another thing people rarely understand. A tank looks powerful from the outside. Thick armor, big gun, engine like thunder, but inside, it is just a few men making choices with sweat in their eyes and fear in their throats. Tan tapped the breech of the gun. Commander, if we stay here, we can keep the trail open. If we go up there, maybe we get some of them out. Maybe, Wah said. That word cut deeper than any argument. I looked toward the bend in the trail. Wounded men were being carried past us. One soldier had lost his helmet and kept asking where his squad leader was. Another clutched a plastic-wrapped letter against his chest as if it could stop shrapnel. Behind them, the mortar rounds were walking closer to the withdrawal route. If the trail closed, the men already coming down would die too. I made the decision. We hold the opening, I said. No one spoke. Tan stared at me for half a second, then turned back to the gun sight. Wah lowered his head and put both hands on the controls. Brother Bay looked at me like he understood and hated it at the same time. I hated it too. Bay, I shouted, send one squad up on foot. We cover them as far as we can. The tank stays here. He nodded once and began calling names. Kwong stepped forward immediately. Bay grabbed his sleeve. Not you. Kwong pulled free. They're my platoon. I still remember that sentence. Not brave in the way songs make bravery sound. Just simple. Terribly simple. We fired over their heads as they moved back toward the saddle. Low and fast between bursts. Tan worked the gun like it was part of his body. Wah kept the tank angled just enough to shield the trail. I stood in the hatch, throat raw from shouting directions I could barely hear myself give. For a few minutes, I believed we might still save them. Then the mortars hit the saddle. The explosions rolled one after another, shaking the trees until leaves fell like rain. Kwong and Bay's squad vanished into smoke. And all we could do was keep firing, holding the road open for the men who were still alive enough to run. By the time daylight finally reached Hill 62, the jungle had gone quiet again. That silence was worse than the fighting. During the gunfire, a man could move, shout, load, fire, pull someone by the collar, do anything that kept his hands busy. But when the shooting stopped, there was nothing left to hide behind. The smoke drifted low between the trees. Red dirt hung on the leaves. The air smelled of burned powder, wet mud, diesel exhaust, and something heavier that I still do not like to name. Our tank sat near the bend in the trail, engine coughing like an old man. The left track was still holding, but just barely. Wah kept one hand on the controls even after I told him to shut down. He looked as if he expected the order to move again at any second. Tan climbed out of the turret and sat on the hull without saying a word. His dented canteen hung from one hand. For once, he did not make a joke. Brother Bay came back around mid-morning with what remained of his squad. Kwong was not with him. I knew before I asked. Bay's face had lost all color, and his uniform was torn across one sleeve. He had mud on his knees and blood on his hands, though I could not tell if it was his. We found some of them, he said. No officer's report ever sounded as final as those 4 words. A search party was formed from anyone still able to walk. I left Wah with the tank and went with Tan and Bay up toward the saddle. The slope was not steep, but each step felt like walking into a memory that had already turned against us. Broken branches marked where men had crawled. Empty magazines lay half buried in the mud. A torn pack hung from a root. Nearby, a plastic-wrapped letter had been pressed into the red dirt by someone's boot. The first body we found was a radio operator. His headset was still on. The wire had been cut by shrapnel. He looked very young, younger than he probably was. War does that. In death, every soldier looks like someone's son. Farther up, the losses grew heavier. They were scattered among the trees in small groups, as if they had tried to hold together until the last moment. Some lay beside shallow fighting holes. Some were near the trail, facing downhill, maybe still trying to reach us. We counted carefully because counting was the only way to give order to something that felt beyond order. By noon, the number was close to 50. 50 comrades. Not a number from a book, not a line in a report. 50 voices we had heard. 50 bowls of rice. 50 pairs of boots drying near a fire. 50 men who had been alive the evening before, complaining about mosquitoes, fever, and the taste of dry rice. Then Bay stopped near a fallen tree. Kwong was there. His AK lay across his chest. One hand still held the strap of an ammunition pouch. His face was turned slightly to one side, and for a moment he looked like he was only resting after carrying too much weight. I remembered him handing me that small packet of dry rice and saying we needed to stay strong. I reached into my jacket. The packet was still there. I could not open it. I could not throw it away. I just stood there with it in my hand while Tan looked down at the ground and Bay covered his face. We carried them back as best we could. There were not enough stretchers, not enough blankets, not enough hands. Men who could barely stand from fever still helped lift the dead. No one gave speeches. No one talked about glory. That kind of talk has no place in a jungle filled with bodies. When we returned to the tank, Wah was sitting beside the track, wiping mud from the links with a rag. He looked at us and asked, "How many?" No one answered right away. Finally, I said, "Too many." That was all I could manage. Hill 62 was still on the map after that day, just a small mark on paper. But for those of us who survived, it became something else. A place where part of our lives stayed behind forever. We left Hill 62 2 days later, though part of me never really left. The order came in the afternoon. Our tank was to rejoin the main column and continue moving with the infantry toward the next supply route. There was no ceremony, no long farewell, no time to sit with what had happened. In war, grief often has to march with its boots still wet. Wah started the engine before sunset. The tank shuddered back to life. The same old roar filling the hull. But it sounded different to me now. Before Hill 62, that noise had meant protection, power, a way through mud, trees, and fear. After Hill 62, it sounded like something trying to cover up the voices we could no longer hear. Inside the turret, everything was still where it had been. Ammunition in its racks, grease-stained tools tied down with wire, a torn bag of dry rice stuffed behind an equipment box, Tan's dented canteen hanging from a hook near his seat. But the space felt emptier, as if the dead had taken the air with them. None of us talked much that first day. Wah drove with both hands tight on the controls. He had always been quiet. But this was different. Before, his silence had been calm. Now it felt sealed shut. Once, when we stopped to clear a fallen branch from the track, I saw him staring at a shallow stream beside the trail. Maybe he was thinking about the wooden boats his father built back in Nam Dinh. Maybe he was thinking about how water at home carried nets and fish, while water in Cambodia hid mines and blood. I did not ask. Tan changed too. He still checked the gun with the same care, still counted rounds, still wiped mud from the breech before sleeping. But his jokes disappeared. At night, when the infantry dug in around us, he sat on the hull with his canteen in both hands and looked toward the tree line. The canteen had another fresh dent from Hill 62, a deep crease near the bottom. He ran his thumb over it again and again. That was how we mourned. Not with speeches, with small movements, with silence, with men fixing things that were not really broken because they could not fix what mattered. The road after Hill 62 was long and miserable. Red dust during the day, mud after the rain, mosquitoes thick enough to make a man slap his own face raw. Fever came back through the unit. And more than once we had infantrymen riding on the rear deck because they could no longer keep walking. We shared what water we had, passed around dry rice, and used our tank as shade whenever the column stopped. Every night, Wah and I checked the left track under a flashlight wrapped in cloth. The repair from the withdrawal held, but just barely. Mud packed itself into the road wheels. Vines caught on the suspension. Leeches stuck to our ankles while we worked. The beam from the flashlight was weak and yellow, and sometimes it shook in my hand for no reason I wanted to admit. I kept Kwang's small packet of dry rice in my jacket. I should have eaten it. Food was never something to waste out there. But each time hunger pushed me to reach for it, I saw his face beside our hull, young and serious, telling me our crew needed to stay strong. So I left it wrapped and untouched. A week later, we stopped near a bombed-out village to refuel. While waiting, Brother Bay came over and sat beside the tank. His squad had been rebuilt with replacements, but he looked older than before, as if Hill 62 had taken years from him. Kwang's mother will get a letter, he said. I nodded. Neither of us said what kind of letter. We both knew. Before leaving Hill 62, I had picked up a torn shoulder strap from a pack near the saddle. I do not know why I took it. Maybe because I could not carry the men themselves. Maybe because the living need something to hold when memory is too heavy. I folded it and put it beside Kwang's dry rice. Then the column moved again. Tracks grinding over red earth. Engines coughing smoke into the jungle. And all of us pretending that moving forward was the same as surviving. Years have passed since Hill 62, but some nights I still wake up hearing the track grind against red mud. I am an old man now. My hands are slower. My knees hurt when the weather changes. The war has become history for many people, something printed in books or mentioned on television. But for those of us who were there, it never turned into clean history. It stayed in small things, the smell of diesel, the sound of rain on a tin roof, the weight of a dented canteen in your hand. After I came home from Cambodia, I brought back very little: a faded uniform shirt, a few photographs blurred by heat and damp, the torn shoulder strap I had picked up near the saddle, and Kwang's small packet of dry rice, still wrapped the way he handed it to me beside the tank. For years, I kept those things in a wooden box under my bed. My wife once asked why I never threw the dry rice away. It had no use. It was old, hardened, probably full of dust by then. I told her I did not know how to explain it. That was not entirely true. I knew. I just did not have words gentle enough. That packet was the last kindness of a boy who never got to build the brick house he dreamed of. It was his hand reaching across fear to tell us we were not alone. To others, it was nothing. To me, it weighed more than any metal. Tan survived the war too. I saw him once, many years later, at a veterans gathering. His hair had gone white at the temples, but he still had that same crooked smile. When we sat down together, he pulled the old dented canteen from his bag and placed it on the table between us. Neither of us spoke for a while. The canteen had been patched in two places. One side was crushed inward from Hill 62. He told me he still kept it near his bed, not because he wanted to remember the fighting, but because he was afraid of forgetting the men who had no chance to grow old. Wah went back to Nam Dinh after the army. He did become a boat builder, just like he used to say. I visited him once. He took me to the river and showed me a wooden boat he had made with his own hands. It was smooth and quiet, the opposite of a tank in every way. He ran his palm along the hull and said, "This is how I make peace with metal." I understood. As for me, every July I open the wooden box. I take out the shoulder strap, the packet of dry rice, and a small photograph of our tank crew standing in red dust. We looked thin and tired, but young, so young that sometimes I want to warn the men in that picture about what is coming. I wipe the dust from the box. I sit for a while. I say the names I can still remember. Kwang, Brother Bay. The radio operator. The men near the saddle. Nearly 50 comrades who stayed behind in the jungle of K. People sometimes ask what war taught me. I never know how to give the answer they expect. It did not teach me glory. It did not teach me hatred. It taught me that courage is often quiet. It taught me that a man can be terrified and still do his job. It taught me that the living carry the dead in ways no one can see. Hill 62 is far away now. The jungle has probably grown over the scars. The red dirt has washed clean many times. But in my memory, that morning never ends. The tank is still there at the bend in the trail. The engine is still coughing smoke. Tan is still at the gun. Wah is still holding the controls. Kwong is still handing me that packet of dry rice. And I am still trying to be strong enough to carry it.